Let me see him. Do something!
I can't. I don't have any bullets.
Okay. Now you tell me what you want. $1 million?
No.
They were only moments away from executing him until he spoke the name of his father. That single revelation changes everything, because now the government's most lethal assassin is about to come after them. The story opens during a dangerous DEA operation already underway. A convoy of vehicles from a specialized task force moves through the streets with precision. Inside one of them are Tony, an experienced agent, and his partner Ivan. Their relationship goes beyond work partners. They share a bond more like family. As they drive toward the target location, Ivan reveals life-changing news. He tells Tony that he is about to become a father. Tony smiles, deeply touched by the announcement, and tells Ivan that the day his child is born will likely become the greatest moment of his life. Soon the convoy arrives at their objective, a heavily guarded drug operation run by a powerful dealer. Wanting to protect his friend, Tony tells Ivan to remain outside with the perimeter unit while he leads the tactical team inside the building. Tony's squad enters with professional discipline, moving through the house room by room while arresting everyone involved. When they reach the top floor, they discover the kingpin and his accountant conducting a massive financial transaction. Tony steps forward to make the arrest, but he overlooks one critical threat, the bodyguard standing nearby. Unlike the others, the guard remains eerily calm, showing no fear at the sight of federal agents. In the blink of an eye, the bodyguard explodes into action. He disarms Tony and opens fire on the agents. The room erupts into chaos as bullets fly everywhere. In the confusion, the killer escapes and rushes toward the exit. Outside, Ivan is speaking with his wife on the phone when the bodyguard suddenly appears. Ivan barely has time to react before the assassin shoots him and disappears into the darkness. Moments later, Tony runs outside only to discover the devastating scene. His closest friend lies dead on the ground, a man who will never live to see the child he was so excited to meet. Elsewhere, we are introduced to another key figure in the story, a quiet man named Nick. At first glance, he appears to be nothing more than an elderly man living alone on a small boat. But behind that peaceful appearance lies a deadly past. Nick was once the government's most feared Black Warrant assassin, an elite sniper capable of eliminating targets from incredible distances with unmatched precision. One day, an old associate named Francis pays him a visit with an offer. The government is dealing with a threat that ordinary law enforcement cannot handle, and they need a specialist. Nick initially declines, saying he is too old, and that his life as a professional killer ended long ago. However, Francis understands exactly how to persuade him. Nick may have retired, but he still cares deeply about his family, and they are struggling financially. Francis presents him with a deal, one final blacklist containing the names of the most dangerous drug lords operating in the country. These criminals are secretly working on a plan that could devastate the American economy. If Nick eliminates every name on that list, the government will make sure his family is taken care of forever. Nick studies the list carefully, his focus returning as memories of his old profession resurface. After a moment of silence, he agrees to take up his rifle for one final mission. Meanwhile, back at the DEA headquarters, Tony is no longer the same man he once was. The loss of Ivan has left him hollow, and the desire for justice burns inside him. Everyone in the office can see it clearly. Tony isn't just chasing a criminal anymore, he is searching for the man responsible for destroying his best friend's life. His supervisor notices the grief consuming him and tries to remove him from active duty, suggesting he take some time off to recover. But Tony refuses the offer. For him, the only path forward is finishing the mission they started. His determination becomes even stronger when Ivan's widow arrives at the office. She embraces Tony and whispers a final request that sends chills through the room. The man who killed my husband, never let him breathe again. Tony and his team begin interrogating the drug dealer they captured during the raid, knowing he is only a minor player in a much larger operation. The man behaves arrogantly, bragging that his boss is far more powerful than anyone the DEA has ever dealt with, and that a massive plan is already in motion, one capable of changing the entire country. However, he refuses to cooperate without conditions. Before revealing anything, he demands to be transferred to a luxury 5-star hotel with complete immunity and first-class treatment. Tony's superior reluctantly agrees to the arrangement in hopes of extracting information, but Tony is furious. To him, allowing a criminal to negotiate while his partner's blood is still fresh feels like a betrayal of justice. Meanwhile, across the city, Nick returns to the craft he once mastered. With calm precision, he prepares his weapons the way an experienced artisan prepares his tools. To avoid suspicion, he swaps his license plates and arrives at the hotel disguised as a harmless tourist. He casually drinks coconut water like a retired man enjoying a vacation, while his golf bag secretly conceals a powerful sniper rifle. Nick quietly climbs to the roof of a nearby building and begins setting up his shooting position, patiently waiting for the right moment. Inside the hotel, the captured dealer is relaxing during a massage, convinced he has secured his safety. But his comfort doesn't last long. Tony walks in and abruptly ends the luxury treatment. Tony tells him the deal is over and it's time to return to a proper prison cell. DEA agents escort the dealer outside toward a waiting vehicle surrounded by security. But the moment the man steps into the open air, a gunshot echoes across the street. Nick's bullet is flawless, a perfect headshot that kills the dealer instantly. Chaos erupts among the agents as they scramble to understand what just happened. Tony reacts instantly. His trained instincts spot the sniper's possible location, and he sprints toward the building where the shot came from. But by the time he reaches the rooftop, the assassin is already gone. Nick calmly walks past the police officers below, appearing to be nothing more than a harmless elderly tourist. Because of that disguise, the authorities unknowingly allow the world's most dangerous assassin to pass right by them. After the sniper attack, Tony meets with his superior, frustrated that their only valuable witness is now dead. With their investigation suddenly stalled, they shift their focus toward the dealer's accountant, who might still provide clues about the larger criminal network. The DEA installs advanced surveillance equipment to track the accountant's movements. Although they are able to monitor everything he does, they still cannot hear what he says during his private meetings. Realizing that visual surveillance alone isn't enough, Tony concludes that they need to plant a listening device inside a high-security VIP lounge where the suspects regularly meet. However, gaining access to that area proves nearly impossible. While observing the hotel, Tony notices a woman named Mina working there. He quickly realizes she could be the key to solving the problem, a different kind of specialist who has access to places he cannot reach. Tony understands that simply approaching her directly will not work, so he quietly begins following her. Mina initially ignores him, remaining cautious about the stranger trying to speak with her. Eventually, Tony has no choice but to reveal his identity. He tells her that he is a federal agent and explains the seriousness of the situation. According to him, dangerous criminals are using the hotel to plan something that could bring catastrophic consequences to the entire country. Tony asks her to help by secretly placing a listening device inside a restricted VIP suite. At first, Mina is terrified. If she is caught helping the authorities, she could lose her job or even her life. But Tony's determination and sincerity slowly convince her that the threat is real. Finally, she agrees to help him and becomes the team's inside operative. From inside a surveillance van, Tony anxiously watches the live camera feed. Mina carefully navigates through the hotel corridors and successfully plants the hidden microphone without attracting suspicion. At last, the DEA gains access to the conversations taking place inside the VIP room. The man they are listening to is Hussein bin Fari, an international arms trafficker and narco-terrorist. Through the microphone, Hussein reveals a terrifying scheme. He has hired a scientist to build a device capable of destroying the entire American power grid in a single moment, throwing the nation into darkness and economic collapse. However, Tony isn't the only person keeping watch on that VIP suite. At the same time, Nick has already positioned himself nearby. Wearing nothing more than a simple cap and moving through the emergency stairwells, the veteran assassin slips into the hotel like a ghost. Just as Hussein begins discussing the final phase of his plan, Nick launches his attack. What follows is a sudden burst of deadly efficiency. Within seconds, the room turns into a massacre as Nick eliminates everyone in sight. From inside the surveillance van, Tony hears the gunfire through the microphone and immediately rushes toward the hotel. But when he arrives, he's already too late. Hussein and the scientist responsible for building the device managed to escape through a back exit only moments before Nick reached them. When Tony finally enters the room, he finds nothing but bodies scattered across the floor. Confused and frustrated, he begins asking himself a terrifying question. Who is this invisible killer taking out the world's most dangerous criminals before the law even gets a chance to reach them? The following morning, the consequences begin unfolding. The hotel is placed under lockdown, and Mina's worst fears come true when she loses her job for being involved in the incident. Meanwhile, somewhere deep inside a secret bunker, Hussein is growing impatient. Furious about the disruption, he orders his plan to destroy America to move forward immediately. The scientist warns him that completing the machine will require extremely expensive components, nearly $50 million to finish the project. Without hesitation, Hussein agrees to the cost. Back in the city, Tony's investigation leads him to a luxurious private party hosted by Hussein's niece, Rashida. Tony infiltrates the event, attempting to charm Rashida and convince her to reveal her uncle's location, but Rashida claims Hussein is like a shadow, someone who appears and disappears whenever he wants. What Tony doesn't realize is that Hussein is watching everything from a nearby security room. Standing beside him is the same deadly bodyguard who murdered Ivan. The bodyguard immediately recognizes Tony and quietly warns Hussein. That man is a DEA agent. He's dangerous. Hussein doesn't hesitate. His command is simple: kill him and eliminate anyone who knows about their operation. While observing the party, Tony suddenly notices a familiar figure across the room, the same elderly man he has seen near several crime scenes. It's Nick. In that moment, Tony realizes the truth. The harmless-looking tourist is actually the mysterious assassin. He immediately pushes through the crowd trying to reach him, but Nick disappears into the night once again. As the chaos of the party settles, Tony spots another unexpected face among the guests. Mina. She is working the event as part of the kitchen staff, unaware of the storm building around her. All the moving pieces of the investigation are now beginning to collide. Tony refuses to let the mystery of the old man remain unsolved. He follows the shadow through the city streets. Nick uses multiple tricks to evade him, but Tony's training as a DEA agent eventually gives him the advantage. At last, Tony corners the assassin. But when the man turns to face him, Tony freezes. The legendary killer he has been hunting is none other than Nick, his own father. Years earlier, Nick disappeared from Tony's life shortly after Tony's mother died, leaving him alone to grow up without any explanation. Now standing on the old man's boat, Tony demands answers. Years of anger and confusion pour out of him. Why did you abandon me? For the first time, Nick finally explains the truth. He reveals that he was a Black Warrant operative, a government assassin responsible for eliminating dangerous targets around the world. But that career created powerful enemies, and those enemies eventually murdered Tony's mother. Nick realized that as long as he remained close to his son, Tony would always be in danger. So he vanished. Not because he didn't care, but because leaving was the only way to keep his son alive. If you were in my place, Nick tells him, you would have made the same choice to protect your child. Looking at the man who sacrificed everything for his safety, Tony finally begins to understand the burden his father has carried all these years. They also realize something else. Both of them are specialists working toward the same objective, stopping Hussein bin Fari. Tony seeks justice for his partner. Nick wants to finish the blacklist and eliminate a threat to the country. As Tony prepares to leave, Nick hands him a secure phone that cannot be traced. If you ever need the ghost, Nick says quietly, call this number. However, before Tony and Nick can figure out their next step, the enemy makes the first move. Hussein's bodyguard, the same lethal professional who murdered Ivan, launches a surprise attack. In the sudden ambush, Nick is knocked unconscious, and Tony is captured before the veteran sniper can recover. At the same time, deep inside a heavily fortified bunker, Hussein grows increasingly impatient. The scientist responsible for building the device warns him that the final calibration will require at least 24 more hours. But Hussein is furious and demands that the machine be activated as soon as possible. Their conversation is interrupted when the guards report that Tony has been captured. Hussein immediately enters the interrogation room where Tony is being held. He demands to know the identity of the mysterious assassin who massacred his men in the hotel. Despite being beaten and restrained, Tony refuses to show fear. Instead, he laughs directly in Hussein's face. The man killing your soldiers isn't just an assassin, Tony says calmly. He's my father, and he's coming for you. Hussein dismisses the claim, believing Tony is simply trying to intimidate him. The idea of a deadly father and son duo hunting him down sounds ridiculous to him, so he orders the guards to begin torturing Tony. If Tony wants to play games, Hussein wants the answers slowly and painfully, but Hussein has already made a critical mistake. He underestimated the specialist. The phone Nick gave Tony earlier was not just a secure communication device. Hidden inside it is a high-grade GPS tracking beacon. Back on his boat, Nick regains consciousness and immediately detects the signal. Now he knows exactly where Tony has been taken. Nick is no longer just a father trying to rescue his son. He becomes what he was trained to be, a professional hunter tracking his prey. Inside the bunker, the lights suddenly flicker and go out, plunging the entire facility into darkness. Through the pain, Tony begins to smile. He knows exactly what just happened. The ghost has arrived. Nick storms into the bunker like a silent storm, moving through the darkness with deadly efficiency. One by one, the guards fall before they even have time to react. His accuracy and speed are frightening. Before most of the soldiers can even raise their weapons, they are already eliminated. Realizing something is terribly wrong, Hussein begins to panic. He grabs the scientist and rushes toward an escape route, abandoning the rest of his men to their fate. Nick eventually reaches the interrogation room where Tony is being held. With quick movements, he cuts Tony free and the two manage to escape just moments before law enforcement forces arrive at the facility. When the authorities secure the bunker, they discover a devastating scene of destruction, but they also find the most important prize, the machine designed to destroy the American power grid. With the device now in police custody, the plan to cripple the country's economy is successfully stopped. However, their battle is far from over. Soon afterward, Tony receives a disturbing phone call from Mina's phone. On the other end of the line is the bodyguard, the same assassin responsible for killing Ivan. He reveals that he has kidnapped Mina and intends to use her as bait. If you want to see her alive, the man growls, come to the location I send you. Tony's first instinct is to rush in immediately to save her, but Nick stops him.
Dump like me.
Nick warns. That's exactly what a professional killer wants you to do. If Tony goes alone without a plan, he will walk straight into a trap. Instead, Nick insists they handle it his way, the way a specialist operates. Tony agrees, and together they carefully plan their approach. Eventually, Tony arrives at the meeting point, stepping directly into the enemy's territory. Face to face with the bodyguard, the killer reveals something surprising. He has already figured out the truth. "I know who your father is," the bodyguard says. "I know he's the ghost who wiped out our organization." Then he delivers a challenge. "Call him. Tell the ghost to come here and face his shadow." The confrontation at the hideout quickly turns tense. The bodyguard believes he controls the situation, convinced that Tony has walked straight into his trap. What he doesn't realize is that Nick is already watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment. From a hidden position, Nick fires a precise shot that strikes the bodyguard in the shoulder, instantly knocking his weapon out of his hand. Taking advantage of the opening, Tony rushes forward and the two men begin fighting in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle. Moments later, Nick steps in and presses a gun against the bodyguard's head, ending the fight. Nick has no interest in killing him yet. What he wants is information. Specifically, the location of Hussein bin Fari. Realizing his employer's operation is collapsing around him, the bodyguard decides to negotiate. He offers to guide them to Hussein's private estate in exchange for a large payment and his freedom. Nick listens carefully and eventually agrees to the deal, but professionals like Nick always operate with their own hidden terms. At the same time, back at Hussein's luxurious villa, the villain shows his true nature. The scientist who built the machine is exhausted and frightened. He demands his payment so he can leave and return to his family, but Hussein has no intention of honoring any deal. Since the machine has already been seized by the authorities, the scientist is now nothing more than a liability. Without hesitation, Hussein pulls out a gun and executes the man in cold blood. His niece Rashida witnesses the murder and finally understands the horrifying truth. The man she once believed was a powerful businessman is actually a ruthless killer with no conscience. Soon afterward, the bodyguard arrives at Hussein's estate accompanied by Nick. In order to bypass the heavy security guarding the villa, they execute a clever deception. The bodyguard tells the guards that he has successfully captured Tony and is delivering him as proof. Behind him, a large body bag is carried inside the building. The guards believe the story and allow them to enter the main hall, but the moment they are inside, the plan is revealed. The body bag suddenly bursts open. Tony jumps out with weapons ready, and within seconds, the father and son team begins firing. Working together with flawless coordination, they move through the room like trained professionals, eliminating Hussein's heavily armed guards one after another. The attack happens so quickly that the guards barely have time to react. Realizing he has no way out, Hussein desperately grabs a knife and attempts to charge toward Nick, but Nick reacts instantly. With calm precision, he fires a single shot that kills Hussein on the spot, permanently ending the threat to the American economy. Meanwhile, the bodyguard watches the entire scene with greed in his eyes, expecting to receive the money he was promised. He demands the $1 million Nick agreed to pay him. Nick calmly looks at him and replies that he knows exactly what the man deserves. Later, when DEA agents and police forces arrive at the villa, they find the aftermath of the battle. Among the evidence is a body bag left behind in the main hall, but when they open it, they discover it doesn't contain a dead body. Instead, the bodyguard is inside, tied up and unable to move. Tony and Nick ensured that the man responsible for Ivan's murder would face the fate he feared most, spending the rest of his life locked inside a maximum security prison. After everything that happened, time slowly begins to heal the damage left behind. Nick's boat is now anchored in a quiet harbor, far away from the violence and chaos that once surrounded them. For the first time in many years, Nick is no longer living like a ghost hiding from the world. Instead, he has become something he never expected: a grandfather. Tony is there with Mina, and they are joined by Ivan's widow holding her newborn baby. Tony shares one final piece of comforting news. Before his death, Ivan had secured a large specialist insurance policy that will guarantee his child grows up with everything they need.